That is disgusting. Can you please go do it in the bathroom?
Why? I don't want to miss the dessert round.
No, you do this all the time, and I'm constantly finding
I don't know where that went.
Close all the way. Close all the way. Close all the way. Isn't that nice? Don't give him that. His stomach can't handle it. He'll get sick.
Oh, he's a cat. He's fine.
Told you.
Shut up. Did you take a Lactaid?
No. I'll be fine.
Told ya.
Shut up. You know where I saw this earlier? The bathtub.
Oh yeah, I needed to scrub it.
Yeah, but I just found it in the sink.
I needed to do dishes after. What? It touched soap. If it touched soap, that means it's clean.
What's up? What's up?
You left the toilet seat up.
Oh, it's not that big of a deal. Just put it down. Girl, wet, get off!
We're not made of money, you know.
Okay, does any of that look familiar to anybody but me? Right? It's interesting. If you boil life down to its simplest form, life's about relationships. And we believe that. We believe at Clear Creek that we do one thing. We find people who don't know Jesus, and we lead them into a life-changing relationship with Jesus. And what happens is while we lead them into that life-changing relationship with Jesus, we, in turn, have a relationship with them as well. There once was a lawyer that asked Jesus, what was the greatest commandment of all? And he boiled it down into its simplest form, and basically what he told him was this: love God and love each other. He said, you're to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and you're to love your neighbor as yourself. Loving our neighbors is something that we probably don't consider like we should. You know, several months ago, I gave the congregation an assignment, and this you need to know about me, is that when I give you an assignment, I actually do the assignment myself. This assignment was that when you're driving through your neighborhood, going home, and you see a neighbor in the yard, because we want to be the best neighbors in our neighborhood, right? Because that's a great testimony for Jesus. You see your neighbor in your yard, you are to stop, get out of your car, and to go and to strike up a conversation with that neighbor. Well, I'm driving home. I hadn't had the opportunity yet. I turn the corner, and there she stands, that neighbor. You've all got one, right? That neighbor. The most annoying. The one who says the most hurtful, hateful, awful things and then backs up and says, what? And so I turn into the driveway, I see her standing there, and I think, maybe I didn't really see her. I look down, I look over, and yes, she's really there. And then I look all around, and I'm thinking, maybe there are no church members here to see that I'm about to drive into the garage and close the door. Well, I don't. I do what I ask everyone to do. I get out of the car, I walk over to that neighbor, and I strike up a conversation with her. She's getting groceries out of the back of her car. And I say, hi, how are you doing? It's a great day. Can I help you with your groceries? She puts her groceries down. She turns at me, looks at me as if she had stepped in something that smells really, really bad. She turns around, picks up her groceries, and walks into the house. That's it. That's the whole story. Because you see, sometimes loving our neighbors ourselves, not as easy as we would like to think. But those are really outdoor neighbors. We talk about neighbors matter here at the church. We're talking about our outdoor neighbors, the people that we meet in the office, or the people we know from the ball field, or we know in community activities, things like that. The outdoor neighbors. But there's another set of neighbors that we very seldom think of as neighbors. And this series is about those neighbors, indoor neighbors. The people that live in the house with you that you often call family, but you don't really think about them as neighbors who should be loved like you love yourself. A husband, a wife, children, stepchildren, grandchildren, whoever lives under your roof, those are your indoor neighbors. And we need to realize that nothing other than loving God is more important than making sure your indoor relationships are as good as they can be. Reality is that some of your indoor relationships have already blown up. You're already there and you're seeing it crumble down around you. And if that's you, you probably would testify to that with great zeal. Yes, Joey, you're right. There is no other relationship other than loving God that's more important than making sure that relationship or those relationships are as good as they can be. I have indoor neighbors. Had them for a long time. A couple of weeks ago, at my house, we were celebrating the 22nd anniversary of my wife's 30th birthday. And her wish was that she could have both of her children, they're both grown and have moved away, both of her children to stay under the roof, all the family stayed under the roof together that night. We went out to dinner, did all that. And the next day they would get up and they, not me, would run with her in the mud run here in Chattanooga. And so they did. Sawyer comes in from Nashville. Olivia comes from across town. We go out to dinner. They stay with us that night. And it was amazing. I had forgotten how much fun it was to be with my indoor neighbors and how important those relationships really were. And the next morning they get up and they get dressed up and go to the mud run. They say every man has his minions. I have mine. That's my indoor neighbors. Now you see what I'm working with. These are the people who are the most important people in my life. And they're the neighbors that I have to learn and still struggle to learn to love as myself. This series is called Fixer Upper, and it's about indoor relationships, really. It's about building our houses to be as strong as our houses can be. And if you've ever watched the television show Fixer Upper, the stars of the show are these people, Chip and Joanna Gaines, and they live in Waco, Texas. And basically they have a home renovation show where someone comes into town, they buy an old piece of junk, and these people come in and they fix it up. And I've heard it described this way. I want to read it to you. What the premise of the show is. Chip and Joanna Gaines take old junky houses and turn them into masterpieces. Now, I want to translate that in my language because I don't enjoy home renovation. I don't even enjoy home maintenance. And so for me, the premise of this show is Chip and Joanna Gaines make nightmares look really fun. Because this would be my nightmare to walk into something that they walk into and to think that it would ever turn out the way that they make it turn out. This series is about fixer-upper relationships. That all of our relationships in life are fixer-upper relationships, and all of our homes are fixer-upper homes. And so this morning, as we talk about those relationships, we have to understand that we live in a world of order, and there are certain laws that dictate our lives. You know, recently we saw an eclipse. And the eclipse, as most people went out and they put on their glasses and they watched the moon go in front of the sun, they thought it was something spectacular, but what many did not realize is they were watching a testimony of the order of God's world. You know, unlike those 3 hours where the world went dark and Jesus was on the cross, that was the suspending of natural law. But what you saw that day was how God's world is orderly and that everything runs in cycles. Well, it's no different from relationships. There are orderly things that happen in our world that affect our relationships as well. The one I want to talk about this morning is the second law of thermodynamics. It's also called the law of entropy. And it reads this way: the natural tendency of any isolated system will degenerate into a more disordered state. I'll read that again. The natural tendency of any isolated system will degenerate into a more disordered state. Now, I'm not Mr. Wizard, and so let me translate that. What he's saying is he's saying this: anything that is left alone will get worse and not better. Right? Anything that we just go and leave alone, do no maintenance, tend to none at all, it becomes worse and not better. I was walking in this morning and one of our members, Henry, said, "Joe, I just got to tell you this morning I'm going to have to cleanse my soul." my Kia Soul that's in the driveway and it's dirty. I want to cleanse my soul. And I started thinking, what if you took that Kia Soul and you put it in your backyard and you just left it there? You never started again. You never drove it again. You just left it in your backyard. What would happen to that? Well, eventually it would start looking really dirty. And eventually the airs would start, the tires would start to deflate, dry rot, rust. Why? Because when you leave something alone, it gets worse. It doesn't get better. Same happens with your house. Live in a house for 20 years, do no maintenance on your house. Guess what's going to happen? It's going to fall down around you. Why? Because when you leave things alone, they get worse. They don't get better. Relationships are the same way. We have to understand that relationships can fall down around us. Many people grow up believing in fairy tales. They believe that Snow White's prince will always come, that Prince Charming will kiss Sleeping Beauty, and that Rapunzel will always get out of the tower. And the reality is that that's not true. And actually the dumbest sentence in literature is this one, and they all lived happily ever after. You see, the way it works with fairy tales is that we don't know what happened to Snow White or Prince Charming or Sleeping Beauty. We know that Rapunzel got out of the tower, but what happened to her after that? And when we read something like, and they all lived happily ever after, we don't have the courage to add on to the end of it what we should, and that's that they lived happily ever after because they were willing to work on their relationships and they were willing to be fixer-uppers in their relationships. Sometimes happily ever after turns into something like this. And it's Snow White and her prince, and life just happens. Because the reality is in life, every relationship we have is either a fixer-upper or a falling downer. We're either doing something to maintain that relationship, or that relationship is going to fall down around our ears. So, if you've ever watched the show Fixer Upper, you know this. That when Chip and Joanna go to these homes and they start working with homes, these couple will choose which home they want to renovate. And the first thing Chip and Joanna will do is they will go into the home and they'll check its foundation. They want to make sure that the foundation is solid. If it's not, they're going to do whatever they can in order to make it solid. And so the question this morning, as we talk about the foundation of our indoor relationships, how strong is your foundation? And the text I want to use this morning is right at the end of a very famous sermon in Scripture. It's the Sermon on the Mount. And in Matthew chapter 7, Jesus says these words, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on a rock. And the rain fell and the floods came, and the winds blew and slammed against that house, and yet it did not fall, for it had been founded on the rock." I love the way he starts this statement because it's the ending of a lesson, but what he's saying, all the things that I just told you, it would be a good idea to go back and to revisit those things, because if you'll hear these words of mine and you'll actually do what I've told you is important to do, your relationships will be dug deep. Your relationships will have a solid, strong foundation. And we all have to be attached to something solid and something strong when the storms come. I wish that what I'm about to say were not true. I wish I could tell you that you will live happily ever after. That's not the way life works. Storms will come. If they haven't already come, fasten your chin strap, Jack, it's coming. Storms will come into all of our relationships sooner or later. I mean, think about it. Look back over the last year of your life. What storms have you endured, and how did you get through those? And did you get through those because you were founded and attached to a foundation that meant something? Where's that foundation found? Well, he just told us that it's found in the words. If you're someone who's new to Scripture, and maybe you're new to this whole Christian thing, you're thinking, well, where do I jump into Scripture? If you really want to know the mind of God, at least a good place to start, read Matthew chapter 5 through chapter 7. You're going to read this sermon where Jesus talks about the things that were truly important to the heart of God. If you hear these words and you do them, our foundation becomes really, really strong, rooted and established like an oak. The Apostle Paul wrote these things in Ephesians chapter 3. He says, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you may, being rooted and grounded in love, may be able to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth, the height, the length, the depth, and to know the love of Christ which surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled up to the fullness of God. He's saying you want your relationships to work, be rooted and grounded in love. Love God, love each other. You want your indoor relationships to work, be someone that participates in a love that is beyond explanation. He says that you can know what can't be known, that you're going to understand something that surpasses all knowledge, and that because of that, you grow into the fullness of Christ. In the book of Colossians, he says this, if you can indeed continue in the faith, firmly established and steadfast in your faith, that's what he's talking about, and not moved away from the hope of the gospel that you've heard, which was proclaimed in all creation under heaven. In these two passages, he says, dig deep. Place your foundations in things that matter. Love God, love each other, and know this love that is beyond comprehension. Hold on to your faith. Be rooted. Have a strong foundation. Strong houses and strong homes have foundations in the unchanging teachings of Jesus Christ. And they're not built on fairy tales. They're not built on worldly philosophies. They're built on the gospel, the teachings of Jesus, where hope is the gravel and forgiveness is the concrete. Love is the rebar that holds all of that together. And some of you may be saying, you know, what if I'm too late? You know, I wish I could tell you that my relationships are crumbling down around me. They're gone. Crumble was a long time ago. Well, what do I do now? Well, the best advice I can give you is the scriptural advice, and that's that there will be another storm that comes. Prepare yourself for it. Dig deep. Find a rock. And rebuild your house on it. Repair what you can, reclaim what you can, reconcile what you can, but dig deep and claim your foundation. Tap back into the foundation of the rock. My wife and I have, this coming December, will have been married 34 years. We got married right when she was born. Our marriage, just to be as transparent as I can, and I don't think she would mind, our marriage has never been a fairy tale. We were once called Beauty and the Beast. I don't know if that counts. The guy said that. I told him if he ever called my wife a beast again, he was in trouble. You know, we're not fairy tale. Never have been, not now. For us, marriage has always been working. It's always come hard. But I can tell you this, that we wouldn't have been together after 34 years if we didn't have good parents who taught us how to dig deep and find a foundation. I mean, we've been through a lot of stuff, but we wouldn't have made it without him. And so if you want to build your house on the rock, hear the things he says and do those things and to dig deep. When he talks about building your house on the rock, there's a cautionary tale here as well, because this passage goes on as he ends this sermon in Matthew 7, 26 and 27. He says, everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. The rain fell and floods came. The winds blew and slammed against that house, and it fell. And great was its fall. And you know, in our culture, there are too many beachside relationships. I saw on Facebook not long ago, my cousin who lives far away in Middle Tennessee, she had posted this picture of the beach, and basically she said that she would love to live on the beach. She would love to live on vacation, I think was her statement. And it does seem nice, doesn't it? To kind of live in a picturesque place where everything looks good and things seem so tidy. And a lot of times we choose beachside relationships. A young lady looks at the guy and says, he is so good looking and he seems so successful. I'm willing to overlook his lack of integrity, his lack of character. And sometimes guys will look at girls and they'll say, man, she is just so beautiful. It doesn't matter to me that she doesn't seem to be someone that follows God's teachings. Because, she's always going to be beautiful. These beachside relationships, they're built on looks and youthfulness and money and success. And sometimes we think, why not? Why not do that? Why not give in to that? We might get lucky. There might not be a storm. But the problem is when we build our hopes and we build our foundations on the perfect relationship and having the perfect children who do the perfect things, and we teach our children that you're to be successful. It doesn't matter if you have integrity. It doesn't matter if you have a character. Just be successful, achieve and accomplish. What happens is eventually the storms come and our house looks something like this. And it leaves devastation in its wake. I've often heard people say that when a girl's young, she's looking for Mr. Right. When a guy's young, he's looking for Miss Right now. And the truth is there is no Mr. Right and no Miss Right. There's just people who are flawed. And the question is not, are they right? It's, is your relationship built on the right foundation? Is it built on the things that truly matter? Because if we're depending on another person to be our foundation, we are building on the beach. We're building on something that is not going to last. Building on the beach results in shifting foundations. And these shifting foundations lead us into lives of greed, lives of selfishness, lives of resentment. Interesting part about this ending to the lesson is that there is a result. Unlike the story I told at the beginning where the lady picks up her bags, walks in the house, and I have to tell you, okay, that was it. There's a result to this story. It fell. And great was its fall. Sometimes we think we're only hurting ourselves. Now, we live this beachside relationship, and if it falls, then there's other relationships, big deal. There's other people, more fish in the sea. The problem is that when the house falls, there's emotional shrapnel that hits everybody around us, and sometimes it can have eternal consequences. It affects children, families, friends. And when I started thinking about putting this lesson together, the thing that really struck me is that I always say that we're eternal beings. We are. All of us are going to live eternally somewhere and do something. And as Christians, our greatest hope is that we will live forever with God. It's good hope. But do we ever back up far enough from the picture to think that if we're eternal beings and our indoor neighbors are eternal beings, we're going to live forever with them too? And that living forever with them is something that truly matters? The Apostle Paul talks about love in 1 Corinthians 13, and he begins the chapter saying, if I speak with the tongue of men and of angels and have not love, I become a sounding brass and a clanging cymbal, and if I have the gift of prophecy. And he goes on and on and on. He talks about what love really is. But when he winds up the thought, he winds it up this way. In verse 13, he says, but now faith, hope, love, abide, or live in these things. But the greatest of these is love. Why? Well, faith and hope are meant for this world alone. At some time there will be no need for faith, and the things we hope for we'll see. Love is the only thing that goes beyond the grave. Love is the only thing that's truly real. The love that we have for God, the love that we have for our indoor relationships. We need to spend our life building on foundations that are made of something solid, not of sand. Because the best builders dig deep and lay their foundation in the rock. And for us, laying our foundation in the rock is about laying our foundation in Jesus Christ. You know, when Jesus was telling this story about a rich man or a man building his house on a rock and someone else building a house in sand, people understood what he was talking about. It wasn't a great mystery. They understood Palestine. And during the dry season of Palestine, the ground would get really, really hard. As one of my friends used to say, it got harder than woodpecker lips. But when the rainy season came, that ground got soft. And people that were willing to dig deep and to dig in the rock and to put their foundations there, and then they would build, whether it was a rainy season or dry season, that house would stand. But if you were lazy and you just built your house on that dirt and said, that'll be good enough, eventually your house would be destroyed. Our relationships are no different. If we're willing to do the work, and we're willing to understand that if it's not a fixer-upper, it's a falling downer, then those relationships will stand. The only solid foundation for us is formed when we put our foundation on something that we can't create ourselves. And that foundation is Jesus Christ, his teachings, his life, and his hope and his promise.